Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Payroll Hot Topic session. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce who will be presenting and providing support throughout this webinar session. We have Lindsay Anastasio, our Assistant Controller. We have Wanda Martin, our Payroll Manager. We have Belinda Ogorick, the HR Director, and she's going to be providing support and adding some additional information related to furlough. And we also have Jennifer Story, our payroll business analyst, who will be sharing with you some information regarding ITAMs. So today's agenda, we're going to cover something that's new, funding end dates for projects, and we're going to share a couple of queries that you can use to monitor those end dates for your projects. We're going to talk about furlough. We're going to give a quick overview of how that looks for the university, how it's going to affect your pay, and then how to report in ITAMs as well. We're going to review the paycheck modeler in the employee self-service pay on the employee self-service page for HCM. We're going to talk a little more about overpayments, and then we're going to show you where you can find resources and contacts at the end of the session. So I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay, and she's going to begin with talking about funding end dates.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I want to introduce to you some new functionality that's coming soon to HCM. We're looking at an implementation date of the August 31st payroll for this. It is putting funding end dates on projects. This would be internal projects and grant-funded projects. And what it does is it brings over the project end date from finance into HCM. And once that end date occurs in HCM, it will not allow payroll to process on these projects anymore. So all of you with employees that are tied to projects will be impacted by this. And it's important that we maintain account changes and keep those up to date on employees, because once that funding ends, payroll won't post to those projects. And in order to get payroll processed, we will have to move those employees off to A or E funds if they're still tied to ended projects. So we've developed some queries that will help you know who is on projects that are coming up soon for end dates, and it will allow you to be proactive in either setting up risk accounts for those that are on grant-funded projects, or extending the end dates, obtaining more funding if necessary. And the queries that we've developed, you can run by end date or by funding source. So I will show you what those queries will look like. The names of them are on the screen there, and you can see that it will show you 4 different prompts for this query. You can run it by the funding end dates. You can see what's coming up. You can run it by a specific project, or you can even run it by the PC business unit. So the USCSP, of course, is your grant-funded projects, your external, and USCIP are your internally funded projects. So the query results will bring back the employee's name, the impl record that is affected, and it'll show you the job effective date, the combo code that it's on, and it will also show you if the position is checked for auto term. So if they're already marked for auto term, you won't have to worry about changing the status on those employees, because it will auto term itself, and it'll tell you when the next column there shows you what date it's set to auto term. So if it falls within the project funding end date, then you're okay. And then this is the second query that is available, and you can run it by specific projects if you're wanting to search for those. And we do have the milestone notifications that go out on grant-funded projects, the externally funded ones, so that you know 90 days ahead of time, and then again 30 days before the project ends, that those projects are coming up on an end date, and you can go in and start the account change forms at that time. Does anybody have any questions on the funding end dates?
Looks like we may have a question. So let's see. Sometimes we have students or hourly employees budgeted on projects. Their pay is on a lag. Will that lag pay post once these changes are implemented?
As long as the earnings take place before the funding end date, you're okay. So most employees on a lag will be fine because the actual earnings will take place before the project end date. So even if, so say the project ends on 6/30, but the employee isn't set to be paid until 7/15, those wages will still go through because the earnings took place prior to 6/30.
Okay, another question is for payroll on grant accounts, what will happen if the project is going to receive another increment and extensions from the sponsor, but the sponsor doesn't send it before the end date? Will the payroll still get kicked off and then need to be moved back once the extension comes through?
Those are the kinds of things that we can work out with your PAA in the SAM office. So that's where the communication between all those offices is important, because we will have to coordinate that to make sure that that we're processing those timely and correctly. I think we'll be able to leave them on the grant if there is an extension coming. But we will have to coordinate that with the SAM office and then the controller's office so that we can get the end date extended and it flow over to HCM in time.
All right. Do we have any more questions before we move on? You're welcome, Savannah. I think we're good, Lindsay.
I'll hand it over to Wanda to kick it off for furloughs.
Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday. And just so everyone knows, I had to verify that it's Wednesday. So I want to get started with this. This subject is never an easy subject to discuss, and it's never a easy one to implement. So we just want to acknowledge all the departments that went into putting a lot of time and effort into ensuring that this furlough process was rolled out throughout the university, throughout our payroll system, throughout our HR system, communicated to the employees. So I'm going to give kudos to HR, to HCM supporting the payroll for all the effort that was put into this. This is our normal meeting time. So for us on that furlough work team, this is like a regular meeting. So we decided to invite you guys to our meeting. So not only happy Wednesday, but welcome. To give you a little bit of an idea of furlough, you know, because of the financial impact of the COVID-19, university as a whole had to make the difficult decision to roll out a mandatory furlough program. This furlough program is impacting the Columbia campus and Palmetto College for all employees who have a base salary of $118,000 and above. It's going to be effective for the 2020-2021 fiscal year, and it began on July 1st. All employees that are part of this furlough were notified on June 24th that they were a part of this furlough. So we've had individual reach outs to them. We've communicated with them. So they're very aware that they're part of this furlough And we are opening ourselves up for questions just to kind of make this process a little bit easier for them, because furloughs, like I mentioned earlier, are never easy. The number of furlough days are as follows. We base them on tiers. And of course, as you probably heard from other presentations, this furlough plan was put before the state HR and it was approved. And Belinda will jump in at any point that she needs to clarify or reiterate any points that I mentioned. But our plan for this mandatory furlough actually went through the state HR for approval. So we are following all state HR guidelines. For tier 1, the base salary of 200,000 and above, they have 20 furlough days that they have to take within that fiscal year from a mandatory perspective. If there are any changes or adjustment to this, HR will quickly communicate that out. We don't want to address any of those. We're just presenting to you what the plan is now so that everybody can get a firm understanding without any confusion of possibilities, because we can only work with the now. And as of right now, these are our tiers and these are our known number of days. Tier 2 has a base salary of 118,000, between 118,000 and 200,000, and that's 10 days. Now, 9-month faculty have a little bit of a different tier because they work physically 9 months of the year. So their base salary of 118,000 and above, and they have 10 furlough days. And we have on this slide the HR link that kind of goes into all this detail with additional detail. And like I said, you've heard it through other presentations, and you'll probably hear it again as we work throughout the fiscal year. The next slide, Lindsay, please. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about how furlough can impact your pay. I think Lindsay's going to flip my slide.
Did it not go to the next one?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it went. It was a little bit slow. I may have a little bit of lag on my system, so, but here we are now. Employees who earn leave will continue to earn leave at their regular rate while they're on furlough. So furlough does not impact the accumulation of leave. During the furlough period, employees are entitled to participate in the same state benefits as otherwise available to them, with the exception of receiving their salary. So they will still be a part of the retirement plan. They'll still be part of the health plan, dental plan. All those things they're still entitled to participate in. There'll be a little bit difference in how they're paid for when it comes to retirement, though. So retirement benefits will not be negatively impacted from the employee perspective, as I mentioned, but the departments themselves will see an increase in the amount of retirement that they pay on the behalf of the employee. What that means is that the department will pay both employee and employer portion of retirement when an employee is on furlough for the furloughed wages, meaning that's the wages that the employee had to forfeit because they were furloughed. They did not work those days that we referred to earlier. But as a department, the university as a whole, when as a department, I mean university, still has to cover the retirement so that the employee does not lose the benefit of that retirement on those earnings that they would have earned if they had worked and not been furloughed. And that kind of goes into it a little bit on this next bullet point. For benefits which require employer and employee contributions, the university, I'll reiterate again, will be responsible for making the employer and employee contributions on that section. So does anybody have any questions about that? Because that will flow through department expenses. You will see an increase in your retirement expenses. Okay,
I do want to mention too that if you have an employee that is partially grant funded, the retirement expense on those furlough wages will pass on to the department's A or E fund, not the grant.
Thanks, Lindsay. Exactly right. Because we have to be careful about the grant funding, and that hasn't changed. You still have to track and monitor your grant funding. Okay, we're ready to move on now. And like I said, I think I've got a little bit of a lag here. The furlough, continuing on how it would impact pay. The reduction in pay for mandatory furlough is spread throughout the fiscal year for the employee, so they will not feel the impact within one paycheck. For voluntary furlough, though, it's different. That pay impact is felt within the pay period that you take those furlough days. So you're going to have to be very much aware that if you have employees that reach out to you and say they would like to be a part of voluntary furlough, because remember, voluntary furlough is available across all campuses. Mandatory is just regulated to the Columbia campus and Palmetto College, but anyone has the option of going for voluntary furlough across all campuses. The reduction in salary applies to the overall going salary, but there are certain supplements that are also going to be part of the furlough process, and we've listed those supplements out there beside within the presentation. And just so everyone will know, you will have access to this presentation, so you don't have to have these memorized, because we're ourselves are learning them and making sure we understand that these particular supplements are subject to furlough. But I'm just going to read them out loud just so we can hear them. Our administrative salary adjustment furlough, faculty overload, grant salary adjustment, market geographical, special assignment pay, temporary salary adjustments, and variable pay. All these supplements are subject to furlough, which means that they're paid wages within these categories. They will be furloughed. Their wages will be reduced because they are on furlough. And the furlough applies to only to the primary job. It does not apply to an internal dual position. So if you have an employee that's teaching at a section University 101 through a dual employment process, a dual employment position, they will receive full payment for that University 101 section. Does anybody have any questions? I know that's a lot.
No questions right now, Wanda.
Okay, we'll move on then. And it says we will not have the employees' furloughed pay reflected in the job data, because it's important that we keep track of the original pay that an employee was hired under for HR reasons. So when your HR contact actually looks at the PeopleSoft HCM system, they will see the amount of pay that employee will be paid. The adjustment for furlough takes place behind the scenes, and we have a process set up in PeopleSoft that goes in and makes an adjustment to the pay before it actually is reflected in the paycheck. So if you go out and look into HCM on job data, the salary is going to be unchanged, but have it known that if you have a mandatory individual throughout the entire fiscal year, their pay is going to be reduced by a behind the scene process. And if they have questions about that process or questions about how that's calculated, they can reach out and we'll clarify it for them. But it's not going to be visible to anyone who pulls up that salary on and within the job data. Belinda, do you want to expand on that, or are we good?
You're doing good, Wanda. You're doing excellent. You got it covered.
We've talked about it. I told you this is our regular meeting time, so this is normal for us. If a change in pay, increase or decrease need to be implemented during the fiscal year, the salary that's entered into the job change e-form should be the amount of the increase or decrease as applied to the true base that appears in the job data. Once again, that's one of the reasons why we didn't want to change it, so that you still have access to the original job data, so that all changes that impact the individual salary goes back to that original salary amount. And when it comes to unemployment, an employee may be eligible for weekly unemployment compensation if during a particular week the employee earns less than their maximum weekly unemployment benefit amount. That is something that employees need to be aware of, because the minute you hear the word furlough, your instinct is, I'm going to go apply for unemployment and be supplemented through my unemployment process. So you just got to make sure that they understand what the unemployment rules are, because since the university is allocating the reduction in pay over the fiscal year, we don't anticipate that anyone within the furlough ranges will have to be concerned about unemployment. But once again, have them study their paycheck, have them understand how the process works, and if they have issues or questions, they can ask, and then we can clarify them for them. And now we're going to have a little bit of a conversation around ITAMs and furloughs, and I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer to handle that piece.
Wanda, can I make, this is Belinda. Hey, y'all. Just one thing about the unemployment, it
Yes.
goes to the Department of Employment and Workforce. So any decisions about that is done at their their office. We just complete information that they send us if someone files for it. So we don't have, we're not the decision maker whether they receive unemployment or not.
And that's a great point, Belinda. Yeah, absolutely. That is a great point.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about reporting the furlough in ITAMs. So there are two separate codes, one for mandatory furlough and one for voluntary furlough. These codes will only be available to those employees. These codes will only be available to those employees that are able to use them. So an hourly student won't be able to see these furlough codes because they're not able to participate in either of the furloughs. So just so no one will use them by mistake. We do want to make sure that it's very important that when supervisors or timekeepers are approving these timesheets, that employees are using the correct code. So if they're supposed to be using mandatory, make sure they're using the mandatory code. And if they're doing voluntary, make sure they're using the voluntary code. It's very important because, as Wanda talked about, mandatory is spread across the fiscal year, whereas voluntary is, the pay cut's taken then. And so we don't want to get confused and, jeopardize the employee's pay. It's also important that the supervisors and timekeepers are monitoring that the mandatory days are taken as they should be, when they should be, but not exceeded either. Those exempt employees must take 5 consecutive days in an FLSA work week, and that's so that their exempt status isn't jeopardized. So there's an example down here. If they enter mandatory furlough Monday through Friday, they're not permitted to work that previous Sunday or the following Saturday in that work week either. If you go over to the next slide, the next thing about mandatory furlough, since it is planned, we would really like that to be entered into ITAMs at least a week before it's taken. ITAMs allows you to put in time up to 2 pay periods in advance. So it would just help out a lot for reporting purposes and just us processing wise that, once that mandatory furlough has been determined when they're going to take it, when it's planned, if they just go ahead and enter it in ITAMs. You'll see in the next bullet point that, due to all this complexity, it is strongly recommended to have a timekeeper either enter these mandatory furlough hours or at least ensure that the accuracy is being done. I know some departments will have several people on mandatory furlough, and those people may have never used ITAMs before. They don't have, typical leave, and so they're not in and out of ITAMs, and their supervisor's not used to approving their timesheet. So it might be worthwhile to use your departmental timekeeper to kind of just make sure everything's getting entered and in there accurately. If you're not sure who your department timekeeper is, please reach out to us. We can let you know who that is. So maybe you can utilize them to help just to make sure all this is getting entered correctly.
Jennifer, this is Belinda. Yeah. We mentioned this in our cost saving webinar on Monday, and I've already seen 2 different colleges have their college division HR contact become the person to enter the mandatory furlough to ensure that it's correct. So that when I know some others that are doing it well as well, and to help minimize the potential errors that may occur from someone not normally entering into ITAM. So we did mention it, and some others have taken that to heart because I think they feel like it'll be better for them as well, because they won't, it'll be more efficient, and since they're used to entering time. That's just what I wanted to add. Sorry.
Yep. So that's good. So some people are already utilizing that. So like I said, if you have any questions about who that person is or anything like that, just reach out. There's some contact information at the end of this PowerPoint. The next thing is just a reminder for furlough in general. The 12-month exempt employees will be effective started their 7/15 check, whereas the 9-month employees won't be impacted until the 8/31 check when their position's active after the summer.
All right, so we have a couple of questions before we move forward. Thank you, Jennifer. These are related to what was back, and I believe we have some people with their microphones on with some noise in the background. So if you could double check that, that'd be great. Thank you. So the first question is for grant-funded employees who are furloughed, is the amount that will be charged to E&E funds both the employees and the employer's retirement contributions for the lost wages?
Yes, on the furloughed wages that are attributable to grant funds, the A or the E fund that for that department will be charged both the employer and the employee portion that is attributable to those wages.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how will voluntary retirement contributions and payments for things like healthcare savings accounts, supplemental insurance, etc., be handled? Will they be prorated over the remainder of the fiscal year, or should the employee try to take furlough over separate pay periods to ensure they have funds to contribute to these voluntary paycheck reductions?
That is a great question, and your recommendation actually is pretty impressive. Thank you very much. Because they will be impacted by whatever pay period they take that furlough in. So the process of going through and examining when they want to take voluntary furlough and how it impacts their checks and how it impacts their benefits, I think it's a great process, a great recommendation that they need to go through. It will not be spread out. It will not be allocated. Everything within voluntary furlough impacts, as of now, everything within voluntary furlough impacts the pay period that you take those furlough days. So I think that's a great recommendation to go through and look and make sure that you have your benefits covered.
Belinda, we have a question for you as well. Oh, go ahead. Do you have something to?
Yeah, I was going to add, there's certain things like the state and benefits and retirement, but if it's any supplemental insurance and it's something if you don't have enough money in that check to pay for it, it'll be your responsibility to pay for it.
Correct.
Okay. And Belinda, Barbara's asking, is the College of Arts and Sciences one of those that will be doing the timekeeping on their level?
Barbara, I don't know that. The emails I received were not from the College of Arts and Sciences, but that does not mean they're not doing it. I just don't have that knowledge. I was sent some information on some other colleges, but that was not one of them. So that might be something you want to reach out to Latasha or Darlene about.
No, we're not doing it. It needs to be handled at the unit level.
Okay, thank you. All right, I believe that's all the questions for now. So Wanda, you can.
Okay, we're going to now talk a little bit about furlough salary calculations. I'm not going to go through each example. Like I said earlier, you'll be receiving a copy of this presentation and you can kind of go through each example and make sure you understand how it works. But what you'll see is that things are separated on a pay basis. We have 12-month staff that earns more than $200,000. We have 12-month staff that earns between $118,000 and $199,999. We have 11-month staff that earn more than $200,000. 11-month staff that earns between $118,000 and $199,999, and 10.5 month that earns more than $200,000, and 10.5 month that ends between $118,000 and $199,999, and then the 9-month faculty altogether. And what you see on the bottom is how we came to the salary reduction factor, which is for each pay period, what the individual that's been furloughed, what their salary falls based on the salary range and their tiers, as we referred to earlier. What that amount is, we create a percentage that their pay would be reduced. And what we've done is we provide the percentages based on the pay basis and how everyone is paid. And we've given you examples on if you fall, for instance, the 12-month that earns more than $200,000, you have a salary, you have a reduction factor of 0.077 to determine an amount of decrease of $15,400, and so your adjusted furlough salary is $184,600. And so that, if you go through each pay basis, you'll see that example. So if someone has a question about how it works, understand that the furlough amount is determined based on a percentage based on your tier, and then that amount is spread throughout the fiscal year for a mandatory employee. Does anybody have any questions about how that works? Once you get this, if you look at it and you have follow-up clarification questions, just reach out and let us know. We have contacts at the end of this contact information at the end of this presentation, and we'll be glad to kind of clarify for you anything that you're confused about. But all the percentages are computed in order to determine the reduction amount for each tier and each pay basis. Okay? And what we have here are the furlough earning codes. You should see these earning codes on a paycheck stub showing the reduction. Correct, Jennifer? Jennifer Story. And so this is just the codes that if you run across them, everyone will understand what these codes are. You have the FRF. I'm not going to go through each code, but it kind of splits out, but based on pay basis, once again, because that's the driver behind this whole process that we've created behind the scenes to determine what the furlough amount of pay is. And it just kind of details out what pay has been furloughed based on which tier you fall into.
And also, Wanda, these, for anyone that's in HCM distribution, when you drill down into the details, you may notice some of these earning codes, so you'll be able to identify those as furlough related.
Thanks very much, Joy. You're very right.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. When we went and created the process for communicating with the employees about their furlough, we recommended that anyone that's furloughed go out and run their paycheck through the paycheck modeler within PeopleSoft. And what the paycheck modeler does basically is give you an idea of what your paycheck would look like if you make changes based on earnings, deductions, and that kind of thing. But before I go through that, I want to lay out there that this paycheck modeler will not work for 9-month employees until August the 16th, until August the 31st. They have to have actual paycheck.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good.
All right, I got them muted. Thank you.
Okay, you're fine. But so just to clarify that, you can, any employee at any time, you, me, whoever, including the furlough employees, can access this paycheck modeler. So it's not just limited to furloughed employees. And this paycheck modeler works for anyone that is a current active employee receiving a paycheck. So that means that if you receive a paycheck and you want to understand how your paycheck will change, you will go through and you can run a scenario through this paycheck modeler and know what your new paycheck is. We recommended that all furloughed employees use this modeler to get some idea of an estimate of what their furloughed paycheck will look like, meaning their check is going to look like after the furloughed pay is removed. This will not work. The paycheck modeler itself does not work for 9-month employees until after August 16th. So they have to be an actual employee that is scheduled to receive a paycheck. So after they receive that August 31st check, they should be able to go in and run this through to see how that process worked. Was that clear enough, or was that clear as mud? And so we're just going to run you through this paycheck model a little bit. You will access it through the employee self-service, and we had a picture of it before, and you actually click on the paycheck screen. It says payroll, the little there's a word for it. The tile. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, thanks, John.
You're welcome.
That was not coming to my mind. You click on the paycheck, on the payroll tile, and it allows you to access the upcoming menu. So if we can go to that menu, Lindsay, will be good. And then you actually click on Paycheck Modeler. It will show up on the left side of your screen. And I actually went through this for myself a couple times. And then it brings you to step 1. The first step that you have to do is consent. And I won't go through all the agreement, but take time and read it, because as with any agreement, it has details that you need to know. You will click there that says, yes, I have reviewed and agreed to terms and conditions. And then you click on Let's Get Started. And once you click on Let's Get Started, it brings you up to your earnings. And then you have the edit button. What you should see is your regular pay. And then you have the edit button. And once you click on that edit button, it gives you ability to adjust those earnings to what you think your earnings will be. And then that is the earnings that are used to determine what your paycheck net amount will be. Those are the gross earnings that are used to determine what your paycheck net amount will be once we've gone through the entire process. Then here in our examples, you'll see that this individual had a reduction. So they started out at a gross, and so they had a reduced amount to their 7,699. They were at 8,333, and now it's 7,691, and that's to pay the amount that they put into the earnings screen, and that earnings amount is used to calculate their net pay. Okay, we can go to the next screen, Liz. Yeah. And then if you want to do something with deductions, then that's fine. But normally for the using the modeler for the furlough process, there's no change in deductions, because you still want to keep your benefits. Like Belinda said earlier, there are certain benefits that if you're voluntary that you're going to have to cover, vision and things of that type. So you probably don't want to change those, but you just want to know what your net check is going to be if you're voluntary, and if you're mandatory, you want to know what your net paycheck is going to be. You just leave your deductions alone. And then the percentage amount for your retirement is going to change, because remember, the university covers the percentage related to your furloughed wages. Next screen, Lindsay. And so you change that amount, and then once you adjust that amount, you don't have to really worry about your taxes, because unless you want to change your tax, your W-4, and you want to project what your W-4, the impact your W-4 changes would have. But like I said, as an individual that's being furloughed, they would have to go to some analysis to determine what they would and would not change in order to determine what net pay they want to see. And then you hit calculate my model check. And then once you do that, it'll tell you that it's been calculated. You press OK. And then you keep moving. And it should give you what that net check is. And like I said, this paycheck modeler is available to anyone, and you yourself could now go out and try this to see how it works for you, based on the fact that if you wanted to change your taxes, change your deductions, if you wanted to anticipate a raise, anticipate a cut in pay, then this is a process that you would go through. Does anybody have any questions about that? And this was offered, like I said, to all furloughed employees. It went out from a communication to HR. We in payroll backed it up. We will go through the process with anyone who has concerns about it. Overpayments. We're not going to talk a lot about overpayments, but that is just something that we do not think we can stress enough when it comes to this current environment we're in, because there's a lot of things that could potentially lead to overpayments. And so we want to make sure that we have terminations in on time, that we do not have late terminations, that we have time entered correctly in the ITAMs, and that all goes back to that COVID time, furlough time. Make sure your time that the time that's in ITAM is accurately reported, and that's why we were recommending that you have a timekeeper that enters all this, particularly when it comes to all these different scenarios we have existing in our current environment. And then we do not need late notifications of leave without pay, because all that COVID time, furlough time, all that can impact leave without pay also. So we just want to make sure that there's enough analysis going into this process so that we do not create overpayment scenarios. And when the overpayment occur, then the payroll department sends out a notification to inform the employee and the department, if applicable, that there was an overpayment event. Something happened. The department does not have to do anything. That is all. It is all processed through payroll. The payroll department, like we said, sends notification, and we work with the employee. We determine what the repayment terms are based on rules and based on processes, and we have very stringent rules that we have to follow. We have communication rules because that has to be followed as far as working with employees and with overpayments. We have how the paychecks were impacted. All that has to be covered, and we have to make sure we cover that. So that's why we need to make sure everybody understands that it's up to the payroll department to communicate and negotiate with the employee and not the department itself. And once again, if an overpayment is made on a grant and not funded quickly, then like Lindsay explained earlier in some of our other discussions, the expense will be moved to an A fund or an E fund. And I know we talk about overpayments a lot, and we'll probably talk about it again in the next discussion, because this overpayment issues affect the employee, affect the university, and it affects the department. So we try to keep those as limited as possible. And so we just want everybody to understand that we, the payroll department, work with the employee because there are certain rules that we have to follow in this process.
And before we go to the next slide, I just want to really stress the importance of getting paperwork turned in timely. And Belinda, please chime in here too, but it is so important to get the paperwork turned in timely, whether it's getting somebody paid or terminating employment. It really has a huge impact. I mean, sometimes we see paperwork being submitted as late as 6 months. So please, whatever you can do to help improve those processes and get the forms turned in timely would be much appreciated.
And I'll add in all the HR deadlines for our office are out on our HR Toolbox website for anybody to see. So that's out there if anybody ever wants to know when's it due, because we stress it. We try to get, if it gets in by the deadline, those are the ones who are stressing, but we don't stop working. We say that constantly to make sure everybody gets paid as much as possible when they're supposed to get paid. But not having the paperwork obviously does present a problem as well. So also kind of tagging on to what Lindsay said. And another thing too is for whoever is approving time in ITAMs, it's really important that you actually look at the timesheet. It's real easy because everybody's so busy, and we all know that, just to see the timesheet pop up and you don't even have to look at it. You just hit the approve button, but you really need to be looking at the timesheet to make sure that, especially now with the mandatory furlough, with people possibly doing voluntary furlough, that the information that entered is correct, because there's a lot more put on supervisors when they're approving this to make sure that it's right. With this, because it could have some unforeseen effect if it's not. So, or if they put the wrong code in as such. So we just want to make sure of that. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
And so I think, Joanne, that's it for as far as overpayments is concerned. And I think we'll let you open up the topic on resources.
All right, thank you. Okay, everybody. The team shared some great information with you all today, and I know some of you would like to have a paper copy of that. So I'm going to work with the Controller's Office check guy to get this out there, hopefully by the end of the day today or early tomorrow. And you know where you can find that. You're going to be able to find that presentation and this recorded webinar out there on the Payroll Toolbox. And then, as Belinda mentioned, they also have a lot of mandatory and voluntary furlough information in their HR Toolbox. They have PowerPoint presentations as well as recordings, and there's a lot of great information out there, and that's where a lot of our furlough information came from. All right, so if you have any questions, we have a list of contacts that you can reach out to. So we have for funding end dates, please reach out to your postal board administrator. They can work with you on that. If you have any questions regarding mandatory and voluntary furlough guidelines, please reach out to HR. And as I said, their HR toolbox has a great amount of information there that will be very helpful for you. Any questions regarding overpayments, please reach out to Wanda Martin, to her personal email. Questions regarding ITAMs, please email Judy Timmons. And then anything regarding COVID leave and your pay, you can email uscpay@mailbox.sc.edu. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and you have some experts in their area that are here to answer any questions that you may have. So please take the opportunity right now to ask those before we end our session today. All right. You know, these areas, HR, payroll, you know, all controller, everybody's doing such a great job with providing you with the information you need regarding furlough and anything COVID-19 related. So, you know, looks like you guys are where you need to be in terms of all of that information. So we don't have any questions right now. So I would like to say thank you everyone for joining us today. You know, as I said, Payroll Hot Topics, always a hot webinar. We had 126 participants, and we love that. And I think, Lindsay, I'm going to start adding payroll to all of our webinars that come out of the controller's office and GFM, just so that we can get great numbers. But thank you for joining us. And, you know, you can always reach out to those people that we listed on the slide before this. And we want to wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.